Funding for Building New York is provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.
Welcome to Building New York. My name is Michael Stoller. In 1975, Silvercup Bread closed their factory. In 1979, Harry Sooner of A. Sooner and Company decides to buy this factory to relocate a portion of his companies to Long Island City. Today, Silvercup Studios is the largest production facility for films, for movies, films, TV, and commercials. I'm fortunate today to have the principals of Silvercup Studios, Alan Sooner, CEO, Stuart Sooner, principal, president, and both principals of Sooner Equities. Both of you are graduate architects. How did you ever get into the idea to create a studio?
I'll let Stuart answer that
Fine.
one.
They're also brothers, I have to say.
As architects, we both enjoy development. We grew up in the construction business. And in a sense, we've also gotten very involved in recycling old buildings, whether it be bread factories, steel factories, or old apartment buildings. So we believe in reinventing uses in buildings.
You know, prior to the show, we were talking, and Alan said to me that when you were 7 years of age, you wanted to build things. You always had this desire to build. I don't know if it was the Erector sets or something else. You wanted to be involved with building.
I said this?
You said it to me.
You sure? You got the right brother?
I had the right brother.
Okay.
And you
I did have an Erector set at 7.
And you said you wanted to get involved with buildings, and then you went to school to become a lawyer originally. You went to Georgetown.
Right. George Washington.
George Washington for law. Mm-hmm. And then you changed your career to become an architect.
Correct.
Now, Stuart, you always wanted to be an architect?
No, I didn't know I wanted to be an architect. I enjoyed building things and working with my hands, enjoyed construction. As a little kid, loved, playing in the backyard and gardening. But my first couple years of college, I was a sculpture major. So I liked building and carving and sculpting. And then I went into architecture as I realized that would be a good bridge for the fine arts and the construction industries that we grew up in.
Now, you said the construction business that you grew up in. Your father was one of 8 brothers, correct?
No. His father, our grandfather Aaron, was one of 8 brothers that came over on the boat, as they say.
And
their name in Poland was Sina. And when they emigrated to this country, the way they wrote it in this scrolly European script, the immigration guy says, okay, you're the Sooner brothers. And that's how the name Sooner came about here in this country. So anybody with that last name is a relative of ours. But there were Sooner brothers that went into the jewelry business, some went into the construction trades. Our grandfather Aaron was a tinsmith, and that's kind of what the name meant. And his business was fixing leaders and gutters and things like that. And our father went into it in a more industrial capacity. He was an HVAC contractor, otherwise known in the trade as tin knockers. And he became one of the largest HVAC subcontractors in New York.
And Stuart was saying to me the other day, in addition to being Silvercup, Sooner Equities, as the owner, has built more than 1,000 or 1,500 affordable, all types of residential housing in the 5 boroughs, in the 4 boroughs. Omit Staten Island.
We haven't done anything in Staten Island.
We haven't done anything in Staten Island. Now, when you were growing up, your dad was involved with certain of these projects?
He wanted to expand outside just the sheet metal business. and got involved in different developments, and up as a limited partner initially, and then as a general contractor started to build the vacant building program and the in-tenant rehabs of existing buildings, and mostly affordable housing.
But again, he fell into it in a sense by, a happenstance in life. The guy he was an investor along with a bunch of his friends, and the guy who was running that business died unfortunately in a car accident. Somebody had to step up to the plate to start, looking after that business, and my father was the man who stepped up to the plate to do it, and ended up doing, a lot more of these, moderate rehabs that were being done in the 70s and then 80s.
Now, speaking of the 70s, I think it was 1979 that your father contracted this building.
Last week in December.
And you, at that time, were up in Boston
Yep.
practicing as an architect.
Correct.
And you decided to come to New York?
Well, he went to contract, just before Christmas in '79 on the property. He asked me to help him. I said, sure, I would help him because, that's what you're supposed to say. And in my mind, I was helping him part-time, but that lasted for 6 months when it really became a full-time job. And I had to face a decision, either to quit my existing job and work on this project here in New York, or forget about the project in New York and just stay with my existing job. And after consulting with my employers at the time, they encouraged me to go ahead and give it a shot working in New York.
Now, the building was about 230,000 square feet?
Yep.
And the purchase price at that time?
The purchase price at that time was about $1.1 million.
Good price.
Yeah.
But Stuart was saying to me, when you got to the building, everything was taken out of it. The old bread.
I had the...
Thank goodness they took out the old bread.
The good fresh. There was still flour there. You still can smell the bread, and it wasn't even moldy or anything. It was interesting. But that Christmas, I was at home in New York and toured the building with my father and met the caretaker, Joe Szabo, who was also originally the super for the bread factory, and gave us a tour of the whole building. They had the old linen drawings from the original building. Most of the ovens were sold off and were gone. The copper wire was taken out down to the Con Ed vaults. They salvaged everything to pay off all their debts to the IRS, the pension funds, and everything else. And Joe Szabo was one of the people who helped give us one of the ideas of what to do with the building. My father was looking to move in his sheet metal companies to local 28 shops.
Which I understand, which you never told me.
You
were a member of Local 28?
Si, senor.
You were a card-carrying member.
I was.
And anyway, we'd heard, Joe had the story that one of the networks had come to look at the building to use it, didn't know whether it was going to be used as a studio, as a warehouse, but it was one of the places where the seed of that idea came from, because two architects were not going to necessarily come up with that kind of idea.
But now Joe Szabo, who he's mentioned now at least 3 times, you must understand, he still works with us. Okay, I don't recall, how old is Joe now? He's probably 72?
I think 72.
72.
So what happened? You buy the building, you move part of the sheet metal company into the building.
Correct.
And then you build a 3,000 square foot studio.
It was a test.
It was a test because
It was a test.
Stuart said to me, the ceilings were too small for a tennis court.
Well, no, I invented a game called No Lob Tennis. The only problem was nobody wanted to play it.
There's a new game. It's called beach tennis, which is with a little ball.
Go ahead.
So
Also, when I toured the building, I found a little corner of the building, which was the old refrigerator for the milk and the yeast. And I saw the glass block windows were all painted black, and some light was coming in over there, and I realized where I was in the building. And I said to my father, Harry, I said, if you ever buy this building, if you actually go ahead with it, I'd like to have this little corner and build my own apartment, duplex, and studio over there, which I did, and I wound up living there for 10 years.
you were living...
I lived in the
Silver
studio.
Cup for 10 years.
So you were an illegal tenant because it had a commercial...
No, it's actually in the New York City Building Code, you can actually have a caretaker's apartment in an industrial building.
So you and Vicky were living in this?
Right.
That's interesting.
She agreed when we got married that she would try it for 6 months.
And you spent 10 years there.
It's like he started 6 months, you know, as a
Right.
working
Things end up taking it.
So it's 1983, 1984.
Yeah.
Cool Whip goes off, you know, the commercial does well, and then business took off booming. You said to me that it
Well,
was like...
Yeah,
it
we
was-
built. we built 2 more stages in 1984 because the period from June of '83 until the spring of '84 was kind of a test. So then we took the balance of that midsection, second quarter and third quarter of '84 to build 2 more stages to really see, testing it further. And then the largest of those 3 stages that we built, stage 9, was about 6,400 square feet, and it had a big curved wall called a cyclorama. No one in New York had one that size before. We were advised by the people we were working with to put one of those in. And that studio, in its first 6 months of operation, the only days it wasn't booked were Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. Every other day of the week, the stage was booked. That said to us, maybe you got a business.
Later on in the broadcast, we'll talk about the new project that you're doing. But during the years, I mean, everybody knows that, or they don't know, or they'll know now, that Silvercup Studios has been the production facility for some very famous movies and shows. Why don't you tell my audience which shows that you've been doing?
Well, if you're going to go way back in time, little movies like When Harry Met Sally, though we didn't do the Meg Ryan Katz's corned beef scene there. Godfather Part 3, moving,
Crocodile Dundee.
Crocodile Dundee was...
Romancing the Stone, going way back.
Yeah.
And today, in the
more
last couple
recently,
of years?
Sex and the City and Sopranos, 2 unknown shows initially to HBO, which certainly took HBO into whole new heights and
Right.
shows how wonderful it is to work in New York.
Yeah, Silvercup's had HBO's 2 most successful series, bar none.
Now, basically, during that same time, Suna Equities has been building New York, building affordable housing, building housing. Stuart, why don't you tell me about what the type of projects that you've done? I know you've done a lot in the Bronx, you've done a lot in Harlem and other areas, and then we'll get to the Renaissance. But 84, tell me a little bit about those properties.
In 1986, actually, we built Anderson Housing, which is up in the Bronx above Yankee Stadium, which were these burnt-out shells on Woody Crest, Shakespeare, and Anderson Avenue. 263 apartments, which at the time was the largest HPD vacant building during the Dinkins administration. And that was all middle-income housing, rental. During, in the earlier 80s, during the Koch administration, also a lot of the vacant buildings that were done up in the Bronx, New York Holding, and other parts scattered around the city, Madison Court and in Queens. And that's where sort of our father, Harry, really wanted to no longer just be a subcontractor in the sheet metal business, wanted to become a general contractor. He wanted to go from being a sub to a general contractor and a developer, which he did in his lifetime, which is really exciting.
Now, you had the notoriety to be a member of the New York City Partnership, and you said you were the poorest kid on the...
and the youngest.
And the youngest on the board. Tell my audience what the New York City Partnership is and what they were doing and what they do today.
New York City Partnership was started by the Rockefellers and a group of people in New York City, which was trying to bring back the city, at the end of the 70s, when the city was certainly having its problems. And its major CEOs and chairmen of most of these large public companies, like Dick Parsons from Time Warner, Jerry Spire from Tishman Speyer, Bob Cattell from Keyspan, Gene McGrath from Con Edison. And these all became, mentors to me and really nice friends. They needed someone who was not only young, but they were also looking to get someone from one of the outer boroughs, because it was very Manhattan-centric. They really wanted to expand, that the partnership should be advocating about new jobs and new industries. So I qualified as both being outer borough and a new industry they were trying to satisfy or include.
But the new industry was the entertainment industry, right. But you were also involved with one of the major missions of the partnership, which was to build affordable housing.
Well, the partnership spun out a separate entity called the New York Housing Partnership that was headed by Kathy Wild and then by Debbie Wright at some point. And it was to build affordable housing for ownership. And it's like we actually came up with the phrase, the pride of ownership for the price of rent. Because one of the problems in New York City is that it's very hard for moderate and middle-income families to afford to own a building. Instead of having to rent it, they can now own apartments or townhouses around New York.
Now, speaking of that, Suna Equities, in partnership with Suna Levine, created some townhouses up in Harlem.
We did, actually, the townhouses we did were both in Brooklyn and in the Bronx.
So what was somebody able to get as a townhouse? The two-family townhouse?
They're a two-family townhouse where one family owns the townhouse, and the other unit is a rental unit, very often to a friend or a family member. That rent helps pay their mortgage. They were all first-time homeowners. To qualify, they had to be within, depending upon which one of the programs, would be moderate or middle-income housing. And we were able to take vacant blocks in the midst of some of the worst neighborhoods of New York City, with drugs, graffiti, prostitution, gangs. And when these people now came in, they owned that street. They weren't just renters. This was their private home.
So this was like the Nehemiah projects, a little bit?
Nehemiah was single-family homes. But yes, we were actually adjacent to some of them. And they became real communities. These people got involved in their community boards, their school boards, and started to take back the streets.
Right, and this is part of the biggest problem that we have today in the city. We don't have market rate housing for the working people.
Right.
You know, and that's something that we have. I think one of the major projects that Sooner Equities did was when you were in the forefront of the Anchor program in 1998, when you were awarded the opportunity to build on 116th Street in a neighborhood that nobody wanted to lend any money. Why don't you tell us about the Renaissance?
Well, that was not Sooner Equities. It was Sooner Levine, with our friend Jeff Levine as our partner. And that was actually with our community sponsor was Malcolm Shabazz's Mosque at 116th Street, which was during the Giuliani administration. And we took a vacant parking lot where actually the vendors market was, which they were moved off from 125th Street during some other famous events here in New York City. And we built 241 limited equity co-ops above a 65,000 square foot retail development with a parking garage below. And part of the mission of the Anchor program for the partnership was not only to build affordable housing for ownership, but also to bring retail to the areas that were building all this housing over the years for more than 15 years, but retail was not coming into the inner cities.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, the Anchor program, when we first were at it there, it was focused on retail. And it was through Stuart and Jeff's efforts.
Right, the Cornerstone program was geared towards residential. The Anchor was more of the retail.
Retail. And through Stuart and Jeff's efforts, they were able to convince the parties that be that this made much more sense as a mixed-use development. And that ended up happening, and working out the financing for that was no easy task, but they were able to accomplish that. And you know, what you had at the end of the day, and Stuart knows the exact numbers, but for the 241 apartments, you probably had, what, 5,000 applications for those apartments?
Yeah, very close to 5,000 applications.
And somebody could, and we had it was broken down into two categories. A certain number of the units were reserved for people earning up to 60% of the area median income.
Right.
And then a certain portion were reserved for earning 165% of the area median income. So someone was able to buy an apartment, a new apartment on 116th Street near the subway, across the street from the subway, for how much?
The least expensive apartment, the one-bedroom apartment, was about less than $5,000 cash payment. I mean, they were assuming a mortgage that went with it. And the most expensive apartment was $20,000 and change for a 3-bedroom wraparound terrace up on the 11th floor, views of Central Park. So it was actually a wonderful thing for New York. And several of those apartments are already turning over, and they're selling now for 10 times what the people's cash payment was. And so it shows the success of the program. But initially, the banks were worried about whether or not there would be enough purchases up there. So even though we went through the ULURP and the zoning change, we were allowed to build more units, the banks wouldn't finance it. But we really turned the corner a lot, and it's really been a great success up there.
And you built 65,000 square feet of retail.
Right.
And the retail, you put a supermarket.
Pioneer Supermarket, a Carver Bank, a CVS drugstore, a
Petland.
Petland, thank you. And Reedland, which is a new it's a Head Start program up there. Zoe's Bookstore, which is a Christian bookstore, a beauty store run by a Korean family, a mailbox, etc. So again, it's service in the community. And is the demographics up there. They have a tremendous amount of dispensable income that wasn't being serviced properly.
And today, in addition to the Sooner equities,
by the way,
yes,
the retail, you know, everybody's worried about what you're going to get in retail numbers. Ended up being a home run.
Hey,
who'd have thunk?
These people, I think Stuart said it to me the other day, these people were going to the Blockbuster on 86th Street. There was a need. These people were always migrating down to 86th Street, and I think the fact that what you did with the 65,000 square feet and what happened second with the Harlem USA on 125th Street and the Pathmark on 125th Street has shown that there's been a dire need, and you really are on the forefront. But on the forefront of really interesting events is this new project, which we'll have a picture for my audience, of this dynamic $1 billion project on the waterfront,
right,
in Long Island City. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it's called Silvercup Studios West, and in many ways it's the culmination of all the various things that Stuart and I have been involved with these past 20 plus years. It's an economic development project, which is an expansion of our studio facilities, so we'll have 8 new studios and support space there.
And one day you're going to invite me to the studios.
Someday.
Okay.
We'll let Tony Soprano invite you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just as an aside for my audience,
You
Alan and I were supposed to, we did a program together in Atlantic City a couple weeks ago, and Alan was going to come out with me on a Sunday night, and he sends me an email on Friday. I got an offer that I couldn't refuse. It's
true.
Because he was invited to the opening party of The Sopranos.
But I still met you in Atlantic City.
Correct.
But in any event, our current studio facilities are about 400,000 square feet between our 2 locations. This new piece is going to add another 350,000 square feet of studio and related support space in shapes that are different from what studios that are different from the ones that we currently have. So
right, but in addition to studios.
I'm going there, okay? In addition to studios, we're putting up a 650,000 square foot office building because the growth that we've seen in our Los Angeles, area, I don't want to call them competitors because they're our friends, but the growth in the studio facilities in Los Angeles over the last 10 years has all been in office space associated with the studio use. On top of that, Stuart and I are both very involved in a variety of cultural institutions in Queens. I'm chairman of the Queens Museum. Stuart's chairman of the Socrates Sculpture Park. He's on the board of the American Museum of the Moving Image, and I could go on and on. But we've been very involved in the arts, and we've allocated within the project 130,000 square feet of cultural space to have more of that activity be down over there. In addition to that, we have 1,000 apartments that'll be market rate apartments that'll be there.
Now, market rate apartments in rental or sale or?
The market will determine exactly what that would be. If you had to take a snapshot today, it's a condos market. These things, are not going to be completed.
Do you think you'll have an affordable component?
That still remains to, be seen. Certainly something that, we'd be looking at. But by and large, right now, that's the way we figured it. It's an economic development project because, see, so many of these other projects that are going on out there, they're just residential.
The housing is only 40% approximately of the total development of zoning or gross square footage.
Right.
So it's a jobs-generating business, and since just to the north of the bridge is also Queensbridge Housing, largest NYCHA and the largest low-income housing in the country. Part of what we're looking to do is create new jobs for the neighborhood. And in the words of Lord Rogers, our British architect, it's a live, work, leisure environment. So it's not just a 24/7. You have recreation, there'll be health clubs, there'll be catering facilities.
Right, and I think the catering facility that the two of you mentioned, there is a dire need for catering facilities all over the city. I mean, a lot of the hotels closing, and Queens really has.
They're turning them into condominiums?
But they're ripping down the hotels.
But certainly Queens, and Western Queens, is completely underserved for that type of use. And so we're going to have a 1,000-seat catering facility, plus a variety of, we call it retail, but it's basically bars and restaurants along the waterfront. We're reclaiming the waterfront. This waterfront has been closed off to the public for over 100 years. And what this project is doing is opening the waterfront. We're providing over 2 acres, okay, of publicly accessible open space. Public never had the ability to get to it before. We're getting rid of this ugly salt pile on a map city street that the Department of Sanitation has used for umpteen years. That street is going to be reopened with a landscape plaza at the end of the street that's going to continue along the Esplanade up and down the East River. And so what this project is, it's living, it's working, it's, you know, it's offices, it's retail, and it's got a 1,400 car parking garage. And it's all the things that Stuart and I have been working on, both in terms of housing, studios, development, culture. It's all embodied into one $1 billion project.
And in addition to that, I mean, Long Island City is seeing a resurgence today with all these new apartments.
Tremendously so.
And Tishman Spires Gotham Center.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people always felt that Long Island City wasn't there. I mean, you've been on my other show and we've discussed that Long Island City has truly seen a resurgence. And you guys at Sooner Equities is also involved with perhaps building some additional housing now.
Yes.
Smaller site, 60 units in Long Island City. Mm-hmm. But going back to the vision of Long Island City, actually Jackie Onassis was there when Gene McGrath from Con Edison was running the power plant over there and telling him that this is the future of New York City. This is going to be the Gold Coast, when she was very involved with MAS.
And how many years ago was that?
That was more than 30 years ago. And Gene likes to tell that story.
You know, and basically development takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It's timing, and location. And I think what your father, the late Harry Suna, following the tradition with his 2 sons, Alan and Stuart, and as you said to me, your youngest son is ready to come into the office right now. He's jumping in over there. And I mean, in addition to being 2 architects, Stuart has another architect, his wife, who's on the Landmarks Commission, Vicky. I think it's truly you've been a builder of New York, and I'd like to thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Funding for Building New York was provided by First American Title Insurance Company of New York.